rolling into town hall now. You can still ask your question. But the floor is open to ask questions of any of the speakers today. I don't know if you care to come down to the front panel, or just I can bring you the microphone. But there's questions open to any speaker on any topic, and you look like you're ready there.
Hi, great talk, by the way, very inspiring. I'm Pranav from UBC. I had a question about these transdisciplinary projects, especially from a perspective of, let's say, graduate students. How do you encourage these projects for grad students? Because, I mean, like you said, this requires a lot of teamwork, a lot of even, I mean, setup, right? Like within the timeline of, let's say, a master's or a PhD. And I mean, even the outcomes of these projects are different. I mean, the impact that we're looking for, it's different. So how do you incentivize, encourage for grad students to actually?
So I would so all of our graduate students and postdocs, so all of our trainees only do their research in the context of our ongoing programs. So for example, in our program in Uttar Pradesh, we've had a number of graduate students, not just from our university, but from London School or Imperial College or Hopkins, have done their doctoral degrees in the context of their program. There's 100 or 300 questions that emerge every day in those programs. There's plenty of research to be done in those contexts. And I know that's a model that Dr. Buddha's fostered as well in his work as well. And maybe you have a comment as well.
So absolutely true. And Jamie, congratulations on the Institute for Global Public Health. It's very much along the lines of what we've created on the Institute for Global Health and Development. So one way of doing that for institutes, large organizations, is to develop a matrix of program project opportunities which are based on things that may be of interest to diverse students, particularly for multi-sectoral work. So when, for example, students come to me, both here and elsewhere, and particularly graduate students, who typically have their own ideas of where they want to work, how they want to work, you listen, and then you present to them the kind of platforms or opportunities that they could have to develop their own projects. For example, I had an intensive care fellow reach out to me to say she wanted to work in low and middle income countries. And here, we had a large program which did not have intensive care at its center. But because we knew the platforms, we knew the areas, the geographies, we were able to create an opportunity where she could develop her ideas within the context of the districts that we were working in. So any large program, any large institute has to create that matrix of platforms, geographies, ideas. It's not easy because many people have gaps. Yeah. And that's where Jamie's point comes in, that you don't have to do everything yourself. The whole point of having collaborations, both within universities and outside, is that there are things that your collaborators can do a lot better. And that's how these networks develop. So in global public health, in this day and age, no one center, no one individual can do anything alone. I mean, I was lucky decades ago that I ran into a group of people that I've had as collaborators, for 20, 25 years. And we worked on big problems together. So I am equally happy mentioning Cesar Victora's work today, because his work, although fairly focused, has been pretty central to the work of 10 other people who've been working in the same areas. Similarly, people working in community health, outreach platforms are very happy linking up with upper ends of the health systems. So that's how it works in global health. So it's like the Manhattan Project of public health worldwide. Not one person, not one scientist can do things alone. And as you move from survival to planetary health, to issues like climate change, issues of context, conflict, peace, displacement. These things do require partnerships and require a bigger picture.
Thank you both.
Great point.
Next question. It's a free-for-all. Well, I had a question about memory from this morning, if I can remember that far. Some of our strongest memories associated with smells, so very kind of different model than fear. I wonder if you could explain it, whether the initiation happens the same, different part of the brain, or what the difference may be.
So I take it that question is for me, unless any one of the other panelists would like to answer. Yeah, so smell is really cool. It's one of the oldest part of our brain, the reptilian part of our brain, and it sort of doesn't get the sensory, it goes right to the amygdala, so it doesn't have to synapse in the cortex or in the thalamus first. So people think it has a privileged role in something like an emotional type of memory. So we've done some really fun studies looking at smells, and you're right. You can see it in movies and books. You smell something and it can immediately take you back to your mother's kitchen and baking bread and all those sorts of things. So it's amazing how smells are super good cues at retrieving a memory. Whereas, other people say music, but that's sort of more highly processed. Smells, they come into the amygdala, the real emotional center of your brain, without being filtered. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important.
Can I ask a question related to this, if I may, on smell alone? So, 2.5 years into the pandemic, what can you tell us about what's so special about SARS-CoV-2 and smell and the prognostic relationships of those who have it affected and those who don't?
Way outside my pay line, yeah. I don't know, but I think it's going to be really interesting. I mean, it's unfortunate, but SARS-CoV-2 has given us this amazing opportunity to look at some of these basic processes. So it's like a very horrible experiment that's going on right now. So I don't have the answers to that, but I know people are really looking at that. Not my lab, though.
Yes, please.
Strangely enough, I actually think I did read something about how the virus can actually travel up through the cribriform plate and get into the olfactory neurons directly. That's a side note. But I have a question for all of our panelists. I'm taking this free for all, quite literally. Oh, by the way, I'm Stephanie from Memorial University, Newfoundland. A lot of us here in the audience are graduate students. A lot of us here are kind of at the upper end of our programs, kind of the more senior level. What's the one piece of advice that you have for all of us sitting here? Maybe it's something that got you to where you are today, or just something that you've always kind of kept in your back pocket.
That was my question.
Right. Jamie.
Oh, you start.
Well,
I can tell you that one of the most illustrative, informative exchanges I had in global health around this question of how do I reconcile my work with that of the other person, etc., was in conversations with Barry Bloom, again, over 2.5 decades ago. So Barry, to those who don't know, was a dean of the Harvard School of Public Health. Fantastic guy, very knowledgeable, knew a lot of stuff. And the question that I posed to him at that time as a relatively younger researcher starting out in global health was, how do you reconcile this focus on basics science and research and on applied research on the other side, which had, public health implications? And his reasoning was very simple. And he said, I don't like this dichotomy between basic science research and applied research. There is applied research, and there is research not yet applied. and he was absolutely right. So we actually then went on and wrote a paper on that for health research systems for the World Health Organization in terms of how academic centers, research funding bodies ought to look at science being one science, just like we have one health concept, a uniformity of it. So When I did my PhD at the age of 42, very late, I actually blended at that time studies of nutrition rehabilitation in children at population level with experiments that were so reminiscent of what I saw in the posters today, rat experiments, looking at mechanisms, etc. Why? Because I was fascinated by it. So increasingly, I would say, we want people to be doing all kinds of science. Today, we would not have had the work that we did on, for example, zinc and diarrhea, or zinc and health and growth, if it wasn't for the basic science studies that had led. Oral rehydration would not have developed and saved millions of lives worldwide if it did not have the basic physiological experiments that were conducted by David Nayland and colleagues such a long time ago. So I see this dichotomy as artificial. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I was thinking, again, I was thinking sort of personally, and I was thinking that, you know, if you look at my trajectory, career-wise, it's total chaos. Like there's no, like you would never plan that. But in retrospect, you make it all make sense. So you kind of say, well, this led to this and this led to that. But so I guess what I would say is that I think that the academic approach and the scientific approach is pretty generic. And I think that the way that it gets applied, people can sort of weave their way into different kinds of ways of using it. And so the first path you're on isn't necessarily the only path that's there for you. I started out my research career working in a lab, and I was going to be a lab-based researcher, and that was what I was going to do. And then I heard a lecture on child nutrition, and I said, oh, you can do that too? And so I completely changed my direction and went that. And then once I trained in public health, did my PhD. I came back, and my first and major, in fact, to this day, my highest cited papers are in gut and gastroenterology and places like that, because I did research on inflammatory bowel disease. And so it's, you know, but the research approach and instinct and the academic and scholarly approach to the world, I think that's the basis. But I see the best researchers, the best early career researchers are ones that have some scope and are creative and aren't just thinking about this laboratory system they have necessarily. But that's in my field. So.
I'm going to say that that's in my field as well. So my advice is to follow your interests. Yeah. So get a broad background, but always do something that excites you, that you really like doing. Yeah. If every day in the lab you hate, it's time to change. Yeah. Life is too short to hate everything. Of course, there's going to be days that things aren't going well, and there's things you don't like to do very much. But find something you really like to do. So even when it's tough, you like it. And the next thing is really echoing what these two others said, is find something that's uniquely your own. Bring your own interests, your own questions, your own background, your own unique path to your science. Do something that you like, that only you can do. And that way you will never be scooped, even if somebody has the same sort of question. It's always going to be about you. So there's no other you. You do you, and that science will just flow out of it.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
My turn, and I think I'm going to echo a lot of what's been said already. I do think it's really important that you love what you do, that you have a passion. And you don't always know where that passion is. I have a passion for that little blastocyst. I mean, what the heck? But I don't expect you to share that. But on the other hand, you know, again, the approaches that we use in our science cross borders. And I think that this concept that there's a continuum between, you know, basic and applied is even more true today than it ever was. So the opportunities are enormous. But it is also true that if you find that you don't like what you're doing, then it doesn't mean that you don't necessarily like science. Mm-hmm. It's just you haven't found the right way to do the science and the part of science or the approach to science that really for you. And I showed you that picture of the 2010 reunion that I had. Those are all people who'd been in my lab and done PhDs and postdocs, and many of them still in academia. Many of them went off into other careers, almost all related to science. And so we had a symposium where we asked them to just come back and talk about how they took different career paths. And it was quite interesting because they were, we had a patent agent, a doctor, somebody who's running a very successful biotech company, somebody who's working for the Gates Foundation, many different approaches, all using their science. And the one thing that happened was they all got to the point where they came into the lab one day and said, this just isn't turning me on. I don't want to get up in the morning and go and do another experiment. This is just not for me. So then they had to stop, and then they all did. They stopped, they took some time, and they said, well, what is it for me? Where's my passion? Where's my interest? And then they did the other thing, that is my other piece of advice to everybody, which is, okay, I think I might be interested in being a journal editor or being a patent agent. I better go and find people to talk to. So network, network, network. And, I'm too old to do all this social media stuff, but even before social media, networking was what we did. Networking is part of doing science. It's how you make the collaborations, how you make those contacts, and how you take a different path, right? So you heard somebody talk about public health, and all of a sudden, I bet you went up to them afterwards and talked to them, right? Yeah. So, it's this business of networking. Find what you love, take the opportunities, but science and the scientific method is going to serve you well. And who have we got left?
Matthew?
Right here.
Jim.
I got one. So I won't add much to what has been said already, but the one thing that I would put the emphasis on is self-confidence. Build your self-confidence. Have that high degree of knowledge and confidence that you can achieve whatever you set yourself to, but be humble in the process. And the reason I put so much emphasis on the self-confidence concept is this imposter syndrome that many of trainees have. I was a trainee back then, so I've had that as well. Serves no purpose because we're all the same. We've all been in your shoes. We've all gone through the same questions, doubts about our ability to achieve success, to realize what we set ourselves to achieve. And so dismiss that. Have confidence in yourself. Go for it. Be humble. And this way you'll be able to navigate and move forward in whatever you set yourself to achieve.
Thank you. Well, I think this is a very positive way to end the symposium for today. Please join me in thanking our 5 speakers for a wonderful day.